Welcome to the Ugly Bug Podcast, a production of the Ugly Bug Fly Shop and Crazy Rainbow Fly Fishing.
Welcome to the Ugly Bug Podcast. On today's episode, we sit down with Kody Luckow, a fishing guide in the Casper area here that's guided for Crazy Rainbow and the Ugly Bug for a long time. Kody's also kind of a pioneer of a cool new fishery here within the state, chasing pike and exploring some shoulder sort of species like walleye as well with a fly rod. So we look forward to bringing that to you. Let's step away real quick from a word from our sponsors, and then we'll get to the podcast.
The Ugly Bug Podcast is proudly sponsored by Wyoming. Wyoming-rooted fly fishing apparel and accessories, challenging the traditional mold, designed by anglers for anglers.
Thanks for joining us, Kody.
Yeah,
appreciate it, man. Today we're going to discuss a little alternative stuff, kind of pike alternative species on a fly rod. Mm-hmm. Let's just start with why would someone want to get into pike, right? What's going to make a trout angler or a carp angler or whatever other odd species you're currently chasing? Why would you, what's the intrigue with pike?
I think just the hunt and the chase of having to cast, hundreds and hundreds of times for maybe nothing, or maybe a 40 to 50 inch pike, or a 20-pound carp or something big, just different than trout.
I think they're incredibly difficult, but they reward you just enough here and there that it still makes it fun, right? Yeah. Not impossible.
Yeah, it's like golf. know, it sucks 90% of the time, but the 10% is worth it.
Yeah.
For
awesome.
Sure.
How did you, is that kind of how you got interested in it, was just something different?
Yeah. Yeah, doing 100-plus days on the reef all the time and on this system and fishing for trout, I just wanted something different. And so, probably 6-7 years ago, I was like, I'm going to go figure these things out. And it took me a long time to figure them out because they move so much. They're always not wanting to eat. They eat once, twice a week when it's cold, and we have a lot of cold water. So it was just that chase that I really enjoyed.
Yeah. So did you start with them chasing them by boat, or were you mostly wade fishing them? Or?
Well, it depended on how windy it was, because my drift boat with a little 3.5 horse didn't go across the lakes very well. Mm-hmm. So if it wasn't windy, I definitely would take a little drift boat out there. But if it was windy, I'd go and fish off cliffs or wade out as far as I can and cast it. Any type of moss that I saw, any type of structure or anything like that.
Is that a big point with them? Is trying to find structure, object like that? Do you see many on just flat, smooth banks, or is it usually on a? I assume they're doing that because it's an ambush location, right? Yeah. They're able to hide, but
yeah, I'd say I see them all over. It depends on the water temps. We get those real cold water temps. I find that they're riding along those sand banks and stuff where the moss might be 10, 15 feet out, but they're sitting in the sand. Not burrowing, but sitting low in that sand, trying to hide in 2-3 feet of water. And then sometimes, even when it was really cold this fall, I was finding them at 10, 15 feet. And I, besides sonar, I wouldn't know what was down there. Mm-hmm. And it was just big rocks, big moss pads, anything I could find like that, I would mark on my sonar and fish it for a couple hours.
Yeah. Are you, I assume being a pike angler, you got to kind of commit to some spots, right? You can't be super quick to jump because you're going to probably spend all day driving around and looking at other spots than actual fishing. But do you have a basic rule of thumb, or is it just a gut feeling as to, I spent an hour here, I feel like I covered it well, I'm going to move on?
I would say a good hour is probably my rule, Mm-hmm. Usually if I'm with a buddy or a client or whatever it is, 30-minute sections they fish. Each angler gets a 30-minute section to fish there. If we don't see anything, let's move. Other than that, sometimes I'll fish from the spot for 4 hours because I really think that there's something there, but most of the time just an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you start having follows, does that say you have a bunch of fish follow and not eat? Do you? Mm-hmm. I'm assuming you're more likely to stick it out then and try to coax that fish into
for sure
eventually eating.
Yeah, because if if I get a fish to follow, it means we're doing something right, you know. So they're ambush people, or ambush fish, not people. So I'm casting right to that same spot, trying to get that, whether it's the same fish or maybe it's brother or sister sitting there at that same spot. It was a good spot for them to ambush for whatever reason, so I'm going to keep trying it.
Do you find that their habits are somewhat the same year after year as far as points you've had success on? You're more likely to find fish there again?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a water level thing basis too, you know. The reservoir we fish, if it's really high, I know that I'm going to have some luck on the north end bays, just because it allows you to get those really drawn out bays that have the 2 to 3 feet, 3 to 5 feet, 5 to 10, versus if it's low and it just goes into those shelfy rocks, kind of will make me go to the west end, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you, so I get, it sounds like it would be an opportunity to almost do some basic e-scouting sort of thing, right? If you're looking for those long drawn out points or big back bays that extend way into the shallows. I would assume that the evolution of mapping software and
it's game changer.
Is a big plus.
Yeah, and especially, you know, as you know, you run a Garmin. I run a Garmin on my flats boat, and it's game changing because you can record. You can get the underlay of the bottom, everything you need to know, and then say you're running across the lake and it's 2 feet lower than the last time you were there. It adjusts everything accordingly. So you don't got to change nothing. You can look. You can use your whole mapping system to figure out your whole day. You know, you and your buddies the night before, you're sitting around having a drink or whatever. You go, hey, let's go try this bay tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I took 2 or 3 days of just driving around that place, mapping every single structure I could find out, marking everything, and you know that was a huge help.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah. Do you find in the spring versus the fall? I guess the ultimate question is their behavior the same at, like, say it's 35 degrees? Do you find them, like, on the same structure there, or is it water temperature based, or is it more like time of year, you think, with like low clouds or low sun shadows?
I think it changes a little bit, but only when that water, it's hot and cold, in my opinion. If you're going in right at ice off when they're getting ready to spawn, a lot of pike, from my understanding, will spawn while the ice is still there. And then that ice, you know, will get a couple bays clear and you can go right to them. I typically try to stay away from them when they're doing that. But, you know, anytime in the spring, I'm really going for numbers, not size. So I'll go and maybe fish a little shallower bays just to see if I can find them. Now, in the fall time, I'm always fishing shallow because I think that water, getting that sun on it, gets a little bit warmer in those bays, and they like to bask in it. You know, so I would say if that water's cold at all, 35 to 44, I'm fishing in really shallow. If it's 45 to 60 degrees, I'm going out and fishing a little deeper, 10 to 15 feet.
So when you're talking shallow, you're minus 10 feet?
Minus 10 feet pulling.
Do you find them minus 5 feet often?
Yeah.
Yeah, they will be in those sort of spots.
For sure,
Cool.
Especially if there's a moss, you know, a huge moss line at 3 feet, they're in there, you know.
Okay.
And that's the kind of the luxury of having that polling platform. I can get up there and I can see those fish. I mean, 9 out of 10 times we're spot casting to them. So that's kind of the fun part of it.
Yeah, I bet.
You know? Yeah.
Also makes you fall apart as an angler, right? Because you know they're there.
Yeah, it kills you
Extra
too.
adrenaline.
Yeah. And we're kind of lucky. You know, at the reservoir we fish, we have that long, wavy type of weed versus like really thick thistle and stuff like that. So we get away with being able to see them a little easier because they're sitting and you can see them. It's not too dense, you know, so I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I assume in the spring months when it's shallower like that, you're obviously not running a full sink, but what's your kind of go-to, let's start with go-to light or shallow water sort of setup as far as line, rod, reel?
Yeah.
And then we can move into to deep water.
My sink, you know, I like to go with like a intermediate sink, like maybe a 3 inches a second. That way you're throwing big flies with a lot of material sometimes, and if you just throw no sink tip, it's just going to sit on top of the water and not act correct, you know. So I like to throw an intermediate when I'm fishing 3 to 10 feet, you know. But that being said, I always bring 3 rods. I have a full sink line that's, what's that SA? I bought that 9-weight, you know. It's a
Type 6.
Yeah, Type 6. I mean, it gets down. Then I'm using a sink tip with a 6 inches a second, and then I'll go 3 inches a second. And kind of depending on the fly too, you know, if I'm throwing a big man bear pig, I'm going to put on my medium size, you know, 6 inches a second. That way, when I'm stripping, that fly is coming back up, because it's going to float with no matter what sink tip you have on it, you know, with that big deer head. So I like it to get down and kind of float back up like it's dying, you know. But those are my 3 go-to lines.
Very cool. Never really throwing a straight floating then. I mean, generally, because it sounds like you're running light enough flies that you're really stuck fishing them as a popper on the surface than or a skater, right?
Yeah. Now, a lot of people have had success, you know, catching pike on topwater stuff. So, I mean, I just haven't had that experience yet. You know, we don't really have I don't see a lot of duck eats or anything like that, you know, or we don't have any type of frogs that are going across that I have seen, you know, to where they're going to go for that type of a food source. But I always go with a sink tip, because I'm throwing light flies, big flies with lots of material. Now, say that I'm throwing something like a Dalai Lama or something, you could probably get away with no sink tip or anything, because that fly's going to sink right away.
Giant cone head.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when you just move out to deep water, obviously then you probably scratch the intermediate a little more, and you're moving towards your full sink or your streamer tip sort of thing.
Yeah, and if I'm fishing with friends, you know, I'll usually throw the full sink no matter where I'm at, just because maybe a friend's not as experienced, and that's kind of hard to manage. So maybe he'll be throwing the 6 inches a second up front when I'm in 5 to 10 feet of water, and I'll throw my full sink off the back of the boat or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Are you running that full sink on a different rod, stiffer rod, bigger rod?
Yeah. If I'm running a full sink, I'm going to try to, we have a TFO rod, the big fly. It's got 2 handles on it, and I mean, you can really just throw that sucker. If you try to throw that on my 8-weight that I have my little tiny sink tip on, it's just not going to throw it very well, you know.
So is it mostly 8-weight driven rods, or are you throwing some 9s in? I mean, is that TFO, I assume, even if it's an 8, it's a super stiff 8?
Yeah, it's super stiff
equivalent 8. To a Winston 10,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. It's the same thing, and it's, you know, they make it for musky flies and musky and pike flies, so it's really stiff at the bottom half of it, you know, so you can actually put some power into it. And yeah, I throw a lot of 8-weights. If I'm throwing like my little bait fish patterns like shad or something like that with EP on it, I'm going to throw my 8-weight because it's nice and light.
Yeah,
you know,
more enjoyable to cast.
Yeah. Don't walk away feeling like you threw a 100-pitch game. You know?
What kind of reels are kind of your go-to program? You know, as far as drag, do you think you need a huge drag, or do you hand line a lot of those fish in?
You know, I would say my go-to reels are Hardies. I like the Hardies, but I don't think you need too much, because you can strip anything. You know, you get that pike. I would say you get a reel with 6 to 8 pounds, you're never going to go above that of drag pressure. You know what I mean? So I kind of think anything would work for reels, but my go-to is Hardy. I like those Hardy ultralights.
You get a huge surface area as far as your pickup too. If you do get them on the reel right, you can really crank on them. Large arbor's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I go large arbor for everything, even trout. You know, I like it to pick up quick.
Yeah,
I hate the going around 100 times.
You pick up 2.5 inches per rotation, right?
Yeah. I like the 10 inchers. You know, just going around. Yeah. For sure.
What's your go-to kind of leader setup? Do you have a tendency to go longer in the spring or longer in clear water?
Longer in clear water is kind of the general rule. I don't throw any type of wire anymore. I really started going, you know, I'd throw a fluoro, 3-4 foot section of fluoro, connect it to some wire with a fly clip at the end of it, so it was easy to change out. Now I've really just gotten away from throwing wire at all, because I feel like where I'm fishing, those fish see it every single time. You'll get a follow and they won't eat. You get a follow next time with fluoro, they eat it, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm going 5 feet. I just go the general rule. I don't know, arm length, probably for me 5 feet. For most people, 6 feet, you know. Yeah. But other than that, I typically am not too picky on that line. You get it enough away. It's kind of like tarpon, you know. You ever find a guide, he just goes whoosh, and the guides I've been with at least, you know, they just snip 5 feet off, and once it gets frayed, you switch line, you know, put a new section on.
You running 40 pound, or what kind of fluoro are you normally?
Yeah, 40 pound.
Yeah.
SA makes that, I call it the blue label, but the saltwater line, you know, and I just use that because I think it has a little bit more flexibility and durability to it.
Yeah. And are you putting all those bugs on loop knots? Are you tying a clinch knot to them? Or
I like the loop knot. That's my, you know, go-to. You know, overhand, 2 above, throw it through, and you're good. What I've really gotten into, though, is, you know, you get into that 40-pound line, and you do like a normal loop knot for trout, 4 wraps, and then go through. You just cannot pull it tight. And, you know, you see guys pulling them with freaking pliers and all that kind of stuff. I stayed away, and what I've done is leave a long tag end, take a lighter, and burn it down so it builds up a little head. That way, if that knot does slip, it's still not going to go through.
Yeah, smart move.
Yeah.
Have you tried the weird, or not the weird, but the big knot tightener tool from Hatch?
I have, yeah. I mean, the less expensive, or not the less expensive, what's the right way? I use the end of my plier handle.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't used the Hatch tool, but I use the end of my plier, so I could see the need for that for sure.
Yeah.
It'd be awesome to have.
Yeah, I've a little bit of the fishing I've done in the past year trying to tie some knots with like 100-pound tippet without something like that and a good set of gloves. There was no way you were going to get the knot seated. You know, you try to hang onto it with pliers and you just couldn't pull.
For sure.
Couldn't pull hard enough. So.
Yeah, and you know, that plier, I've always found like my pliers are always half wore out and, you know, ready to need some new ones. So you go to pull it and it slips off and cuts your line. And I just kind of stopped trusting it, and I looked up a good solution. And that burning thing, you know, it kind of just builds up a little head on the end of it, and I've never had any slippage.
Cool.
Yeah.
Retrieval rates, what's your kind of, you know, if I'm brand new at it, like where do we start?
Quarter beat is what I tell everybody.
Okay.
Quarter beat, swim, quarter beat. If we're not seeing any follows, go to a 3-strip, pause, make that bait come back up and float. Really act as a dying bait fish. The water's really cold. I've found slower works. You know, maybe a half beat, you're stripping it, letting it sit, stripping it, and 9 times out of 10, when it is cold and I'm fishing on that really like half beat, I'll get them to eat in between. And so when I'm pulling, I'll come tight to the fish, you know.
Yeah. Versus
maybe when the water's a little warmer, 60, 65 degrees, you can get away with retrieving a little faster. Maybe an 1/8 beat, something like that. But I think the biggest thing is, you know, as trout, put it in front of their face and acting like you're injured. I think if you can do that, that's the biggest thing. Now, in the reservoir we fish, you know, they have those huge shad. They're like 8-9 inches, so they got to be pretty quick. I think just if you're seeing fish moving slower, you strip slower, and if you see some fish following that are coming after you, strip and
speed up.
Yeah, create some urgency.
Yeah. And then next to the boat, are you do you figure 8? Do you twitch? What do you kind of do if you have a follow?
I would say that I did do figure 8 for a long time, but I called Dustin and he said do ovals versus do some figure 8s, and that's worked much better. You know, I figure their turn radius isn't as quick as a muskie that can eat in a figure 8 and stuff like that. But you know, if they're coming towards the boat, and if I have an option, I'm never doing it towards the boat. I'm always going away from the boat first because they see boats. You know, it's pretty hard to get them to eat next to the boat. Unless they're locked in on that bait. Right.
And then I assume strip set on everything?
Everything.
Try not to lift.
Try not to lift.
Do your best. But you probably will.
I always just tell the people that are fishing with me, just strip until you can't strip anymore. I mean, you'll know when you got a big pike on the other end, you really can't strip it anymore. You know, it's taking it away from you. That's when you can lift your rod. A lot like salt water. And, you know, they're not like jumping and thrashing around on top of the water or anything. They're deep. They're going straight down to the bottom and trying to horse you.
Right.
So they're usually going to get you to your reel pretty quick, and if you strip set it, you're gonna be good.
Are you running like a big giant guide set of pliers or a spreader, or what's your go-to other than losing a finger when you get to flirting with them?
I think the biggest thing that it's those big pliers. I've tried the jaw spreaders and stuff. I just typically, I don't like getting that rambunctious with a fish because you're really putting a lot. I mean, if their jaw locks down on that fly, you're kind of screwed, So what I do at that time is I'll just put them in a net, let them sit in the water for a little bit until they relax, pick them back up and just try to get them with the pliers. Or if I notice that it went really deep, sometimes you can just lift that gill plate and get in there and unhook it and then pull out, and no blood, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you get those fish to bleed, they just don't stop.
Right.
It's hard to get them to stop, especially if they gill them.
Yeah.
But that's a hard part about pike fishing. I feel like if you're not seeing that fish on that fly, a lot of the time when you do your pause, they're eating. I mean, they're engulfing that sucker. Yeah. So that's kind of the hard part about all that.
Yeah. So I guess if you have a fish follow, do you give it a break or do you go right back to it if it doesn't eat and keep?
I go right back to it.
You go right back at it?
Yeah, I had a buddy, Eric, tell me, that fish is right there, always. No matter if he's 10 feet out and 5 feet down where you can't see him, he's still there and he's still looking for that fish that just disappeared automatically,
Right.
You saw that video with Ryan, The only reason I got that on video was because he came back, I saw that huge fish. He missed an eat the first time because he lifted his rod tip, trout set it, casted it back out there, and that fish instantly locked back onto that and ate it again for a second time, and he trout set for a second time. So, I mean, we didn't get the fish, but...
It happens.
Yeah, I mean, you got a 45-inch pike chasing you down, your heart's racing. I mean, sometimes you shit yourself. Yeah. That was one of them,
Yeah, not the first time, probably. Yeah. Ryan's done that.
No.
Yeah.
And I'll do it again and again.
Yeah. Fly design, do you kind of have basic rules of thumb? I mean, you've mentioned shad. There's obviously shad in the system. Yeah. There's some bass, some other stuff like that. Are you looking for stuff that really pushes water, or are you looking for kind of light and wispy stuff, or are you a little bit all over the map?
Yeah, all over the map. This year I found that my shad patterns worked really well. I mean, throwing 2 freaking schloppens in the back, having something that flares out when it's paused, and then throwing something that was nice and thick that represented those shad that were in there. I also have found that sometimes they eat, if you just put it in front of their face with, the most random flies. I mean, I've caught them on sex dungeons and just random little flies that, are trout flies, whatever it may be. I think I just kind of go for whatever. And it's really a color thing in my eyes. I'll go there and I always start with my less colorful ones, something that's a little more natural. And if it doesn't work, we all have our go-tos. And if those don't work, then I'm going all over the board, pink and purple and green and yellow, and kind of just trying to spark some interest, I would say.
Yeah.
Biggest thing, too, was the length of the fly. I noticed this year, originally, when I started, I was always throwing foot-long flies because that's what you hear about. And now I found that my 6 to 8 inch flies work tenfolds over those big, large ones, and they're easier to cast all day too.
Oh, yeah.
Those bear pigs sure look pretty in the water, but you cast them for 2 hours, you're toast.
Casting a gym sock.
Yeah, you're freaking your lower boobies are hurting and all that. You're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
And your friend's finally like, oh, nice, I get to fish again,
Right. Right. Very cool. So on like 6 and 8 inches, do you normally start with like a deer hair head or something that pushes water, or are you not really worried about that? I'm worried more about movement.
More worried about movement.
Yeah.
Now, it probably varies where you're at and what kind of bait fish you have, but where I fish, I like the skinny patterns the most. Something like those, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I like those Pecorini tails
Yeah.
coming off the back. You can interchange. I like throwing just nice little easy EP patterns that create a really like a back and forth. You know, you get a man bear pig and you get all of this material in the middle by those shanks and stuff. They don't really fold over as nice as something that has very light material on it. It's very skinny, and it's just kind of folding and falling all over the place, you know. So I do think it varies where you're at and time of year and all that stuff, but my go-to is to always make it really fat and really skinny. Really fat this way and skinny width-wise.
Oh.
I've always had better luck on that. Now, when we're there, if I have two anglers fishing, one's throwing a skinny that doesn't push a lot of water, and one's throwing one that pushes a lot of water. You know, just trying to mix it up.
Till you get cues and follows and things to pursue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you probably change if you got one that's outproducing the other.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. And what I found most was the color, you know. If I found that this white one was getting followed 6 out of the 10 fish we've had, we're going to put on white. And I'll put on a white that pushes more water and a white that's skinny. And if that one still produces more, I'll put the same pattern on.
Yep.
You know?
Makes sense.
I've kind of been this way with fishing my whole life, of just put it in front of its face and it'll eat it, you know? But that doesn't seem to be true with pike. Seems to be always switching, you know.
Well, that's part of the fun too.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
For
Not
sure.
that easy to figure out, but keeps you wanting to go back to the well and try to figure it out. Though,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
You know, like just this year, I went with my buddy Andrew. We didn't see a fish all day long. I mean, it was just a long day. And within 15 minutes, we caught 2 40-inchers. And you're like, back-to-back fit. You're like, that made it worth it.
Right.
Do I think that was the fly? No. I think it was time of day and where we were at that time, you know, and just a lot of pure shit luck, you know. And I think that's fishing.
Take it.
Yeah, we'll
right?
take it.
Take it.
Exactly.
Not bad. Hard to count on it, but you'll take it every time it happens.
Exactly,
Yep.
yeah.
Kind of tips and advice you could lend anyone that's, you know, looking to get into it?
Just put your time in, because it's gonna take a lot of time. You know, you might go out and catch one your first day just by, like we said, pure shit luck. But if you go out and you don't catch one for another 5-6 times, that's normal. You know, I went out for a whole year and been 3-4 fish, you know, while I was learning where to go fish. And then you find your go-to spots, and then you start learning, oh, well, this go-to spot has a big boulder out here. Well, that one, so does that spot over there. Let's go try that.
Right.
You know, and you just start learning.
Yeah. Keep it simple, stupid.
Keep
right?
it simple, stupid. Exactly.
If it works, find the same system somewhere else and go do it again.
Yeah. And I'm sure you could get way more techie on it and stuff, but I think the amount of time we spent on that reservoir and have mixed everything up for the same things to keep working over and over has been, I mean, a noticeable thing, you know. Stick to your basics and go to it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Places people can find you. Obviously, they can call the shop if they're interested.
Yeah, booking a trip.
You can always give us a ring, and we can get them scheduled. Other than that, social media stuff.
Yeah,
what you got there?
Bambaloo307 is my Instagram. Try to, you know, I'm bad about posting, but I'm trying to get better on that. But, yeah, that's about the only place.
And your TikTok handle?
I don't even have one.
Understand totally.
I need to get better on that.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. There's certain platforms that just don't quite make sense sometimes for a fishing guide, right? But cool. We appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kody.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Ugly Bug Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us via email at info@uglybugpodcast.com or leave a comment on our social networks.